Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Training Industry Leader Talk, Effective Coaching and Feedback, sponsored by ELB Learning, Biz Library, Ariel Group, Leadership Progress Cycle, and Bluepoint Leadership. I'm Emma, Marketing Associate here at Training Industry, and I'm so excited to have you here with us today. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speaker and get the most out of today's program. Throughout today's event, please feel free to use the chat window to interact with the speaker and add any comments. If you have questions, you can submit them by clicking the Q&A icon in your Zoom toolbar below. We'll address all comments and questions throughout the event or at the end of the program during our Q&A section. At the end of your time with us, you'll notice a short survey will pop open in your browser. We would really appreciate your thoughts on today's event. And as always, all of our sessions are archived and recorded on trainingindustry.com. You will receive a follow-up email from us with a link to the on-demand sessions, along with any additional session materials. If this is your first Training Industry event, we'd like to welcome you. Training Industry offers tons of resources for learning and development professionals, like today's Leader Talk, as well as through articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, our podcast, and more. We would love to hear about what you've learned from today's session on social media, so please follow us and tag us on your favorite platforms to continue the conversation. And now, without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker, Jared Oates. Jared is the founder of Leadership Progress Cycle and a co-founder of Niche Academy. He is a teacher, a learner, and an entrepreneur. People are his passion, and he believes great leaders help others realize their full potential. Jared, thanks so much for joining us today. We're all really looking forward to your session.
Thank you, Emma. Well, welcome to everyone. Welcome to Wendy from Canada and anyone else who wants to share where they're joining from. That would be awesome. I'm going to share my screen here. All right, so we've got Colorado Springs and a bunch of South Carolina, Michigan, Louisiana, New Hampshire, all over the US. Fantastic. In Texas, I spent some time in Lubbock. And England. Tammy, welcome to you. So I think we're well represented in Valencia. Que bueno. Brazil. This is great. Philippines. Well, I'm delighted that you're all here, and I think we share a common interest in coaching and feedback. I think, like many of you, have seen firsthand what a difference it makes when leaders learn how to coach with confidence and compassion. And so what I hope to share with you today are some simple ways to fix the feedback process so you can equip leaders to build innovative and cohesive and accountable teams. And I think that really is the dream outcome that all of us are hoping for. So let's dive in. Let's talk about challenges a little bit, things that inhibit the ability to give feedback. But we know that it matters, but many leaders avoid it. And the cost of that avoidance is stuff like quiet quitting and missed innovations and teams basically that operate way below their potential. So this isn't just a leadership issue, it's an organizational risk. And so this session today is about fixing it in a way that's practical to train, easy to practice, and really produces powerful results. I think we can have wonderful concepts as trainers that we know would make a difference, but getting people to engage with it and the overhead associated with making that training available sometimes is one of the most significant barriers. So we know that there are reasons why leaders avoid feedback, and we know that employees generally really want more feedback. And so I think I'd like to start out just by getting a sense from everyone who's participating here today. what what your feeling about feedback is in your organization. So I have a quick poll, and Emma, if you could, there we go, pop that up. So the poll just asks you, and you can select all that apply, which of the following barriers limit feedback in your organization? So people don't know how to say it kindly. They don't know how to time it correctly. They want to avoid defensive reactions. Some just don't make it a priority. And there may be some of you that feel like your leaders are unlimited and awesome already. And I hope there's some of that as well. Okay, so as the poll is progressing, it looks like the biggest reasons are just not making it a priority, which is interesting. Um, Closely followed by wanting to avoid defensive reactions. Okay, so it sounds like managers do know that this is important, but other things seem to take priority. And perhaps one of the biggest barriers is a fear that people won't receive it well. Um, so this is excellent. All right, so yeah, it came out in the end. Um, Not making it a priority was just by a hair the top reason, and then avoiding defensive reactions, and then um, the other two at the top about timing and how to go about it. Um, those were about 38, 39% each. And a few of you do feel like you have awesome leaders. I hope that as we go forward that you'll see the potential in the leaders in your organization, and that you'll feel optimistic about your ability to help them maximize their own potential. Okay, so I think I've shared those results, and okay, let's talk a little bit then about whoops, jumped too far. So let's talk about the numbers associated with feedback. So these are just some statistics that from recent research and some indicating. So this first one, 65% of the people in this particular study, the Zanger-Folkman one, indicated that they wanted more feedback. That's an overwhelming majority. And even negative feedback was preferred to no feedback at all. Of course, given the caveat that they wanted that to be delivered well, not harshly. Um, that's going back to 2014. So this is not something that is brand new. It's something that is a persistent. It's kind of a perennial, um, a perennial need, and that suggests that there are some human nature things that are kind of part of the equation. Some recent studies, regular feedback, organizations that are able to implement it successfully, they see almost 15% reduction in turnover rates. Strengths-based feedback increases productivity by 12.5%. Those are really kind of eye-opening numbers, I think. And almost universally, employees believe that constructive criticism improves performance. So if you assume then that people know that constructive criticism is something that is necessary, that's valuable, then that I think it helps to address the idea that managers sometimes have that people won't want to receive it. So hopefully that provides a bit of context. The other thing that I think is still surprisingly common is that there's a pattern where people limit their feedback to formally defined sessions. Oh, and a great question from Leslie. Would you consider constructive criticism and negative feedback to be synonymous? I would say no. I think you can be negative without being constructive. And so hopefully as I share some of these ideas today, the distinction between just negativity and constructive critique will become more clear. And I hope to offer you a way of thinking and a pattern for offering feedback, a framework for offering it that will frame that as constructive rather than negativity. Great question, Leslie. Thank you. So there is still a pervasive pattern in many organizations where feedback is limited to defined areas like an annual review. And and that's it's something that doesn't really meet the need. It doesn't really create the kind of environment where people can thrive. So one thing that makes it negative is that it's top down. Another is just that it's so limited. And so if you can help people evolve into the idea of coaching, which is I think some of the assumption behind all of the sessions today, coaching that is frequent, that is regular, that is normal, that's the thing that creates traction. Um, it has the highest return on investment because behavior can change much more quickly when feedback is timely. So we talk about the idea of a feedback loop. This is one of the things that we teach in Leadership Progress Cycle. And it isn't complicated. In fact, the simpler, the better. Leaders can train on these basic steps. And if you can practice it consistently, you can begin to see measurable performance shifts in a very short period of time, weeks or months. So it's just the idea that you observe and you try and align with what is really happening, what the real perceptions are within the organization. And then you have feedback talk that's just normalized within the culture of the team. And adjusting together indicates that you're on the same side of the table, you're looking at what needs to happen, and you're making adjustments together. It's not just a dictate from the leader to the employee, you need to fix this. It's something that you work on together. And the last step is just to have follow-up so that it's not just a conversation that gets forgotten. So a key note here is that the smaller those loops can be, the tighter the time frame, the more localized, the better the results are going to be. And over time and over the scale of the organization, the results of that kind of feedback is enormous. So building a culture that is receptive to feedback is really, I think, the best way to think of what we're trying to do. So here are some things that really make a difference. Start small and start safe with praise, and having the feedback be not just negative, but constructive. Um, Organizer data collector is feedback loop. Thanks, Wendy. You'll have to clarify for what organized data collector is. The caps indicate that it's a specific tool or process. Um, so yeah, if you want to share a little more about that, that would be great. So the good news is that it doesn't take years to shift the culture. It takes a very short period of time when leaders model it visibly in obvious ways. And one of the best ways that leaders can model feedback is to ask for feedback themselves. That's modeling something called vulnerability. It's hard for leaders sometimes to open up and allow themselves to receive feedback that may be constructive or from an unskilled team member may even just be negative. But opening yourself up to that, allowing for that possibility, creates a precedent that's essential for other people to follow. And what that does is it normalizes regular feedback weekly. We feel like one of the things that we teach is that regular one-on-ones are essential um, for a healthy relationship between a manager and a direct report. But it doesn't have to be limited to those one-on-ones. It can happen in the course of regular activity. So psychological safety is a phrase that we use to describe an environment where people feel safe to be honest. They feel safe about trying new things. They feel safe if they stumble and make a mistake, that they won't face retaliation or humiliation. And it's really a foundation without which even the best feedback techniques fall flat because people won't open up and they won't trust your intentions. So I'm curious to know, and if you can share this the in the chat, is psychological safety a phrase that your team is familiar with? Yes. Okay. Okay. So a few, one no. Okay. So if a term that people are familiar with, great. Or at least the people team. Okay. So that's interesting. Um, it may be more common with people who are involved in training and HR functions rather than in um, the organization as a whole. So yeah, Crucial Conversations has an excellent program for helping people understand psychological safety. Here's a follow-on question. How many of you currently provide training specifically intended to nurture psychological safety? So guidelines for team meetings. That's excellent. Yes, we do. Familiar with it, but it's not common. Okay, excellent. Minimal training for some, creating some, yes, okay, great. Limited training. It's a concept that can be taught through a lot of different systems and a lot of different programs, but understanding it as an essential foundation for a culture where feedback is normalized is a really helpful thing to keep in mind. It's a tool for evaluating all kinds of training that you do, even technical training. If if you can help people do technical training in a way that allows people to make mistakes and learn, and to have the ability to share ideas, to be honest about what's going on, and to be willing to be able to try new things, that's gold. Okay, so psychological safety, I think, is something that's well understood. I'm going to introduce you now to something that I think is less commonly known. And it's something at LPC that we call paradox-aware leadership. Um, Paradox-aware leadership starts with recognizing that many leadership challenges aren't problems to solve, they are tensions to manage. So, attention is something that results when you have two good values that seem to be opposing each other. So, for example, if you're giving feedback, you want to be candid, but you also want to be caring. And in practice, sometimes that can look like a choice you have to make. I can either be candid with this person or I can be caring. Um, I can challenge someone to do better, or I can be supportive. I can I can celebrate someone, or I can challenge them. And what paradox aware thinking helps you to do is to realize that the best outcomes happen when you fully honor both values at the same time. And that means you have to find a creative and new approach in any given context so that neither value gets diluted and the solution expresses both. So in your feedback, there is a way to be candid and caring, to challenge and support someone, to celebrate and to challenge someone. So paradox-aware leadership means that you're not picking one virtue and you're not splitting the difference either. You're not going to, half caring and half candid. You're going to fully honor both and let the tension between those pull you to something that's even better. So let me share this in another way. Here are some common paradoxes in leadership. So you can be confident, and if you're going to inspire people and take them to a new level, you have to have confidence. But you also need to have caution. You need to be aware of all of the limitations. In practice, people often see those as as opposites, and they feel like they have to choose between one or the other. Another one is accountability and empathy. If you're holding someone accountable, that means that there is a standard that is either met or not met. Empathy, on the other hand, leads you to say, well, there are all these mitigating circumstances, and I know that this person was trying and they have, these limitations they're dealing with. And empathy is essential to creating trust. Empathy is essential to building relationships. Empathy is essential to having open communication within a team. Accountability is also essential. You can't have a team that performs if if there's no attention to results. And so in any given situation, in any given team, in any specific context, there is a process that you can go through to identify solutions that fully honor both. And it's something that leaders have to practice, and it's an iterative process that requires mistakes and experimentation. And the smaller those mistakes are, the smaller those loops are where you try things and get better at it, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to succeed. It's kind of like parenting. Kids don't come with a manual explaining exactly how to handle each situation you'll run into with each of your children. At least none of my kids came with that manual. And so you experiment, you try, you work on it, and you embrace the mistakes that you make, and you try to do better. But the key mindset shift that I'm hoping to articulate here is that the real breakthroughs happen when leaders are looking for those paradoxes. They're expecting that there will be these conflicts of values, and that it's kind of like the X on a treasure map. When you see one of those apparent conflicts, you know that somewhere in there is a way forward that honors both of those. And that's the creative and innovative wellspring to the real solutions that are going to take the organization forward and lead to new levels of team performance. So, flexibility and grit, autonomy and oversight, there's an endless list of examples that we could give. But the key thing that I want to help you all embrace and come away with is this idea that you don't have to choose. And you don't want to half honor each value either. When you find a great solution, it will honor both sides of these paradoxes. So leaders, and this is what we focus on at Leadership Progress Cycle, need to learn to look for those key apparent conflicts between values, recognize them and name them, and then leverage that tension as they find the solutions that will work. As you're giving feedback, you're looking for the competing values and trying to understand how that conflict plays out, and then finding a way forward that honors both of those. So to make this concrete, I want to share with you a specific real world scenario. This is how paradox-aware coaching plays out in leadership. So imagine a scenario where you have an employee, a team member, who is chronically tardy, okay? If a leader has a paradox-aware mindset, then they're going to assume that there is some good value driving that tardy behavior. There's something that employee values that's important to them that is behind the behavior that you're seeing, and they're going to try and ask questions to uncover it. So in the chat, give me some thoughts on what explanations a team member might give if a leader approaches them and says, here's the pattern I'm seeing. I'm seeing, start time is this time, and consistently, I see you arriving between this time and this time. Help me understand what's going on here. In the chat, what would you expect? Childcare issues, great example. That's a wonderful possibility. Oversleeping, family changes, insomnia, traffic. It could be personal time, transportation, bus troubles, struggling with challenges. Yeah, burnout, stress. Okay, ADHD, all kinds of possible things. And if you frame those reasons as a value, whatever the response is, you can appreciate there's a value, a good, whether it's just their own, physical health and sanity or needs of family members. You can validate that good intent, and that then opens the door to describe the seemingly contradictory value that is ignored or left undone when the tardiness continues. So now kind of flip the switch. If you were framing this for an employee and you wanted to highlight an important value that is not honored by continued tardiness, how would you frame that? What are the values for the organization, for the individual that are not honored if the tardiness continues? Put them in the chat. Reliability. Yeah. So as an employee, you're not seen as dependable. People don't have, they're less likely to respect you. The teamwork seems to be missing. Accountability. There's stuff that's not getting done. There's work that's not happening. There's a perceived disrespect for others' time. Excellent. So you have two values here then that you can put before the employee. You have the value that is driving the behavior. You have the ignored value that the important thing for the team and for the future of the individual and the organization that is not valued with the continued tardiness. And you can then, from the same side of the table, explore how to move forward in a way that honors both. And that's the creative and inventive and new solution that is going to catalyze performance um, into the future. Can you appreciate the difference in outcomes between just telling someone that they're failing and understanding the paradox that's in play and finding a way forward that honors both? Now, in some cases, it's it's the way forward is not necessarily going to accommodate continued tardiness. And it may be that the position is not a good fit for someone who can't fully honor the values that are compromised um, when the tardiness continues. In other cases, it may be that the tardiness isn't that big of a deal. Um, and and the way forward is to honor whatever value is perceived to be compromised um, by being honest about the weight of that value. So yeah, it is hard. I think you're right. Brandy, you mentioned you have to think outside the box. You have to look at it from all sides. Yes, that's the whole idea. That's where the breakthrough happens. That's where you find the innovative ways forward and the resilient path. And it is hard because there are some things that are just not going to be possible um, given the context of the organization. And that's where you have to make a decision sometimes whether it's a good fit, whether the position is a good fit for the employee. But fundamentally, whatever the outcome, whatever path forward you find, you'll get to a much better solution and you'll create a much better dynamic within the team for the long term when you approach it as a leader who is paradox aware in the way that they coach. So hopefully that's a useful framework. This is something that we spend a lot of time in the leadership progress cycle and in the training and coaching that we do, helping people to think through. And you really have to do it in the context of the specific goals of individuals and teams, and in the specific dynamics of individual teams. There isn't any way to solve this in the abstract. You have to dive into the complex, messy reality of real world relationships and jobs. And I have found over time that paradox awareness is essential um, in the way that I approach issues with my team. So what I've shared with you so far are some things that are um, mindset shifts. They're concepts. And if you're going to be able to sell this to your team or or find, training or approaches to training that incorporate these ideas, it's going to be much easier for you to make that case if you're able to show that you're practicing it yourself. And so, what I wanted to offer, kind of as a conclusion here, a, a takeaway, a take home, are just a few quick things that you can do this week to begin to experiment with this and make the case for training for your whole team that will help accomplish this. One thing is scheduling one feedback conversation, putting something on the schedule. Of course, you can always um, have informal conversations, but putting something on the schedule actually makes that feel more intentional, and it helps you recognize that you've done something to manifest in the real world this concept that you've embraced yourself. Um, Another easy thing, again, it's kind of in the idea of starting small, is identifying one good value that you see someone representing, someone on your team. And when you identify that, you can offer it as a compliment. You can do it in an email. You can do it in a place or a context where other people can hear it. Um, and that it's just a fantastic way to create an environment that has a little more safety and to build a relationship that'll be useful down the road. Another thing that is even braver is to ask for a piece of feedback yourself. And I found that if you can tie that to something specific, something that you're working on, that's a little easier to do than just saying, I'm interested in any feedback you might have for me and how I do my job. Um, that can feel a little awkward sometimes. It can feel like um, you might have an agenda behind it and someone isn't quite sure what you're looking for. So if you can ask for that feedback in terms of something specific, I rolled out this new piece of training, and I would love your input on what was good and what could be better about the way that played out. Um, so asking for feedback yourself um, is fantastic. And then one last thing to begin to explore this idea of paradox awareness, look for a difficulty, a challenge that you're having, and see if you can identify the competing goods that are in play in that challenge. I think you'll find that just about every significant challenge that you face has some kind of a paradox in play, some kind of competing goods. It might be useful to frame it this way. How do I fill in the blank, given that fill in the blank? And if you do that and you start with the challenges and you look for the competing values, it's a mindset, it's a framework that allows you to look for a solution that doesn't pick sides, that doesn't prioritize necessarily one value over another, but seeks to honor both. Because that's the way the universe is built. There are true values, and if we ignore those true values, we do it at our peril, and there are consequences that we don't like that come from them. And when we notice that there are competing values that create tension, those are the situations that lead to the breakthrough solutions that not everyone else is seeing, because it's much more common for people just to pick sides or to kind of split the difference. So if you have, I'm very interested as you've listened to this, as you've thought about applying it, I'd be really interested to hear questions. And Emma, thank you for putting that in the chat. Um, so if there are Q&A items that you have that you'd like to talk about, um, give that some thought and put those in there, and we can discuss it. Here's a quote that I kind of like. We all need people who will give us feedback. That's how we improve. It's interesting to me that this comes from Bill Gates because he wasn't necessarily known for being self-aware when he was building Microsoft, and it's something that I think he's become better at as he's moved on to the Gates Foundation and other things. And I don't mean to set Bill Gates up as a model, but I think he's a really interesting human case study. And he recognized that there were blind spots that he had, and he needed people who would give him feedback. And he was interested in improving. And I hope that's true of all of us. It's you get this right, and your organization unlocks new potential. It's a leadership multiplier. And that new potential comes into being faster, more deeply, more sustainably than you ever thought possible if you can get this coaching piece rolling and in place. So I'm very interested in your questions. If you'd like more information about Leadership Progress Cycle, there's the link there. And if you'd like to send me an email personally and ask for that free organizational health survey, I'm offering that to anyone who's participating here. It's just a simple tool. It's a standard that we use internally, Niche Academy, which is the parent company of Leadership Progress Cycle. We use it to measure organizational health and just take a snapshot. It's an anonymous survey with 8 questions, and it has 8 different metrics and measures things like belonging and vision and satisfaction and recognition, just how people feel about where you are right now. And it's a really eye-opening kind of tool for understanding at a point in time where you are as an organization. So, okay, questions. Emma, do you want to moderate?
I'd love to. We have a couple, they're coming in quickly. This one is really good. This kind of resonates with me as well. Deanna asks, when I ask for feedback for myself, it often comes off as if I'm insecure about myself, and then the feedback I receive is that I need to be more confident. How would you recommend demonstrating vulnerability and confidence together?
Yeah, I think so personally, I lean into the process. I acknowledge that there are blind spots that I have, and I am willing to take risks and I'm willing to change. Being willing to change is one of the clearest indicators of confidence that I'm aware of, because it says, I am of value, I am powerful, I have the ability to affect change. I am not fixed in either my personality or my past. I can imagine a future that is bigger and better. That's where I'm headed, and that's why I'm asking for your feedback. So that fully honors the idea of knowing you are of worth and knowing that the way you get into that higher next level is with feedback. Does that make sense?
That's awesome. It's an awesome answer. Okay, there's a couple more. There's one question and then 2 that are kind of asking for more examples. So I'm going to go for the question first. What do you recommend when delivering feedback to keep it productive and beneficial to avoid a defensive loop when you notice it starting?
Yeah. To avoid a defensive loop, restate what you hear from the person. So you start by listening, and you ask restating questions until you hear someone say, yes, that's right. When someone says, yes, that's what I think, that's what I feel, then you know that you've honed in on the value, the perspective that they are sharing. And that provides a basis to put you on the same side of the table and say, okay, I can honor that perspective. There is value, there is integrity in that perspective. Full stop. Now, here is another value that is also important. And I think you'll agree it's important. Let me articulate that for you. Now together, how do we find a way forward that honors both of those good things? Does that make sense?
Great. What about this one? How do you prompt for feedback when each time you ask, your manager just says, I think everything's great, keep it up?
Call BS. I think I probably wouldn't phrase it that way, but I think the manager wants to encourage you, and they may not actually see anything that is lacking in what you're doing. But I think the more specific that you can be and the more you can tie it to the goals of the organization, the more likely it is that they can imagine with you ways that it could be better and that your performance could be better. So if you have goals, one of the essential things that we do in the leadership progress cycle is help people get clear about what the goals are that they're working towards and how you measure progress towards those goals. And I don't know of any organization that's just delighted with every aspect of the goal uh, progression that they're experiencing. And so when you frame it as this is what we're trying to do together, and it doesn't seem like we're getting there the way that we want to, how can I contribute to that? And give your boss some space to think about it, but begin with the expectation that there are things that could be better. And that sparks, I think, a different kind of conversation than just, how am I doing? Because how am I doing sounds like, am I okay? Is there a problem? Are you going to fire me? As
Right.
opposed to, here's where we're trying to get together. And it seems to me that we could do things in a new way. Hopefully that's helpful.
Very much so. And everybody, don't worry, we're recording this. So I know there'll definitely be a handful of people that'll go back and watch all this because it's jam-packed with juicy tips. You kind of already answered this one, but are there any other tips and tricks for keeping on track when they're trying to deflect, when you're trying to deliver feedback?
Um, there are a lot of things. I like to do it in person, rather than in just email or text or um, because it allows you to use body language, and there are all kinds of subtle things I catch myself doing all the time. I'm more comfortable sometimes, folding my arms and leaning back or crossing my legs and kind of sitting sideways for someone, and that communicates something and not necessarily what I want to communicate. And so um, being in a context where you can sit with someone and with your presentation, your body, express openness and interest and make eye contact and listening and active listening. I think that's something that really, really makes a difference.
Okay, moving along, we have two that are kind of similar. I want to make sure we have time for them. Can you provide a few examples of the how do I blank given that blank using the paradox topic? And Leslie just wants to know if there's any additional scenarios that you can apply the model to because she likes to go over things a couple of times.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, let's go. I'm going to go back in my slides just really quickly here to highlight a few things that I think are good sources for this. So, um, let's talk about flexibility and grit. How do I know when an experiment isn't working, given that the results are hard to measure? Okay, so flexibility means that you're willing to try new things and you're willing to adapt and change directions. Grit, on the other hand, says stick it out, stay the course. And so how do you know when something isn't working? And it's a tough scenario. Like we all the time when we're trying a new way of marketing something or we're trying a new way of presenting something in the product, it's hard to know how it's going to be received, and it's hard to know whether feedback that we get is kind of one-off, it's just a noisy individual, or if it's something that's pervasive. So how do you know when to stay the course? How do you know when to adapt and change? And I think paradox-aware leadership understands that you need to be willing to stick things out when they're hard, and you need to be adaptable and flexible. And so the way forward is probably going to be something that refines the ways that you're measuring the outcomes. And you may discover that the measurements you've been using aren't measuring what you really wanted to measure, and you need some new measurements. Or you may discover that the measurements are accurate for what they're worth, but they're kind of pointing in a different direction than where you wanted to go. So that's where you make the experiments as small and affordable and fast as you possibly can. And you don't have the answers to start with. That's kind of how this works. But you learn as you iterate.
Awesome, Jared. Thank you so much. This has been a great session. As always, we're out of time, unfortunately. Is there any last words you have for us?
Oh, sorry, you're asking me.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I was just looking at Dwayne's comment. How do you feel about in-person versus virtual?
Okay.
I think I addressed that. So, um, yeah, you have my email address. Feel free to reach out. And just thanks for your time. Thanks for your interest, and thanks for the work that you do.
Thank you, Jared. All right, everyone. We have another 15-minute break up ahead of us. We have Jay and Bernice from Aerial Group. Their session is Coaching That Counts, Transforming Leaders into Growth Catalysts. In just a moment, I'm going to close up the session. You can return to the next session by going back to the Zoom events page and going to the sessions tab. I hope you all stick around, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much.